And if I could have your attention, please. I am going to be passing the baton/mic over to Derek Gow, who is going to transport us to a different area of the world and speak a little bit about beavers in Britain. So thank you, Derek, for being here.
I can hold it. That'll be fine. So thank you for allowing us to attend. Thank you for the invitation. We enjoy coming here every couple of years to your wonderful country. We enjoy going west and buying a fine selection of your liberal T-shirts wherever we can. We enjoy your very recent but fascinating European history and the much greater ancients of the cultures that went before. How many people in the audience today are over 55? Great, okay, so you'll understand the joke I'm about to make next, which is the other thing that really touches our hearts as we walked into this auditorium was the fact that the Walton family are sponsoring your conference here today, 50 years after the last episode finished filming. In the beginning, in Britain, we have had a long relationship with the beaver. We have Paleolithic evidence for it in great abundance from the fenlands in the east of England and scattered through many other archaeological sites. There are charming old folk tales about St. Felix, who has been asked by the Wolf-Inga tribe to come to Britain to anglicize people who had many different heathen beliefs at the time and to return them to the true course of Christianity. And when he was a couple of miles off the coast of the East Suffolk village of Babingley, he was struck by a storm, his ship hit a sandbank, and unfortunately most of his crew drowned. But St. Felix was saved by a family of beavers in about 600 AD who swam out to his rescue and who ensured that he made the shore, he survived. In grateful thanks for this event, St. Felix decided to make sure that the king beaver was consecrated as an archbishop, and that beaver then spent the rest of its life creating a whole range of different acolytes of different Christian denominations. St. Felix, it has to be said, didn't live very long because the Romans caught him and executed him as soon as they found he was bringing this alien religion to their shores. Scattered through the churches and the other medieval aspects of our art and culture, you find illustrations of beavers which are not fanciful. They're not creatures that we didn't know. They're not things that were made-up animals that dance through the old medieval manuscripts at a time when we were very unfamiliar with the natural world. They're creatures that are engraved and carved to represent animals that people knew. We find accounts from nearly 1,000 years ago of landscapes which are not wilderness. They're cultivated clearly by people and controlled. So this is a quote which is commonly accorded in many natural history books, which talks about the church, the mill, the bridge, and a salmon leap, an orchard with a delightful garden, all stand together on a small plot of land. The Teivi being the only river in Wales which is beavers. And the author then goes on, Giraldus Cambrensis being a travelling monk who's trying to drum up support for the Crusades at that time. And the author then goes on to talk about how the animals live and the castles they create and their behaviour. It's an animal we knew. But suffice to say that when you look at most natural history authors, they're lazy people. In the 70s and 80s, if you read books about the history of Britain's wildlife, you'd find that you'd get this quote again and again about the beavers being on the Teivi, and people would assume, therefore, that this animal had gone from our landscapes a very long time ago. And of course, people just took this as being read. It was a forgiven. And it wasn't until an archaeologist called Dr. Brian E. Coles, approximately 20 years ago, started to look again at what old archaeological evidence there was for beavers, and then made a real fresh initiative to look back into the old languages like Latin, to interpret trade records, or to look for other more modern accounts, that it became very obvious that this creature we thought had parted from our landscape 1,000 years ago had actually survived until very recently. And as soon as you start to look and you start that slow flame of understanding burning, what you find is that more and more people find more and more pieces of old poetry or bone or stick, which all indicate that this creature wasn't extinguished in the very far past. It hung on quite tenaciously for a very long time. Sometimes you find these bits of evidence in the most surprising places. So this is a book about, medieval dogs and the kind of dog you need to keep to hunt a wolf, the kind of dog you need to keep to hunt a fox. And there was a dog called a piscator, which was the kind of dog that you need to hunt beavers and otters. If you were working your dogs as hunting dogs in aquatic river systems. There are old trading centres. This is Beverston Castle in Gloucestershire, which once sat high above the wetlands of the Somerset levels, which produced, of course, a great amount of fish in abundance, the reed that was required for thatch, all sorts of other commodities like cranes and game birds that were very desirable as feasting items. And it's almost certain that the name Beverston comes from the dried scent glands of the beavers, the stones, the castoreum glands, that were so favoured as trade items from Britain right the way through the Fertile Crescent, down into Africa, across into India, into China and Korea and beyond. When Mary Queen of Scots was caught and imprisoned by the English in the tower of the castle at Loch Leven, like many court ladies, she was taught the skill of needlework, of sewing, of knitting, of producing intricate and ornate embroidery. And this is one of the embroideries that she left before she departed on her fatal penultimate trip to England. And there are bounty records. In the 1600s, the Elizabethans bring to the landscape a series of bounties or fines that are going to be imposed if you don't act against the animals that take something from you. So the great sea eagles, the foxes, the wolves, a whole range of different creatures have a price imposed on their head. And if you were the kind of person that went out into the wider landscape and brought these creatures back to the church to pay for your efforts, then you'd be reimbursed twopence for the head of a beaver or a shilling for an otter. And in 1789, you have this account from a place called Bolton Percy, which is beneath York, of twopence, once again, being paid for a beaver. And the clerk that wrote the account of this on the following page of his ledger, recorded that a shilling was being paid for an otter. And what this very simple note tells you is that they were able to determine the difference between a beaver, which was worth much less, and an otter, which was worth much more. And that this almost certainly was not the first time that this recorder had ever seen these two dead creatures. When I wrote my book, Bringing Back the Beaver, about the kind of literal history of how this whole process worked incredibly illogically in Britain, you get some charming letters back from individuals. And the old lady standing on the walker at the front of the bridge, had a story about how in 1933, as a young woman with a whole group of other gaggling small children, from the mining community that she lived amongst, that she went to that bridge and can remember very clearly seeing beavers building their dams, when she was maybe 4 or 5 years old. There is no evidence at all now of once coppice trees there. There was a great house that lay in a landscape above it, which had a menagerie, but we've been back through the records of this menagerie, and we can find no record at all of anything other than llamas and deer and kangaroos. There's no mention of beavers at all. Though these were animals that could have been very easily traded for with the Hudson's Bay Company, who exported many live wild creatures the world over, there's no record to suggest that these animals were directly captive. And this lady lived on a river that's called the Humber in the centre of England. And at the very tip of the Humber, you have the place called Bolton Percy, where the last of your old records of the bounty being paid came from. So we just can't understand or clearly see now when beavers in Britain became extinct. That having been said, the idea of restoring them is also, it's not a new idea. The talk of bringing this animal first comes back in about the 1930s, and then there are further discussions and an attempt to restore the beaver in the 1970s. Again, this rises in the 1980s, but it's not until the 1990s, and Britain's sign up to the Berne Convention that Scottish Natural Heritage actually openly starts to discuss the possibility of restoring beavers. Every single one of the other attempts had failed because they were crushed variously by government or by landowner interests. And prior to, perhaps 10 years before this remarkable project, the Scottish Beaver Trial actually got its license in 2009, other people had imported beavers from countries like Poland quite legally in Germany to keep them within fenced areas on their estate. In 2009, 16 animals were brought for the Scottish Beaver Trial from Norway, and those animals were studied for a 3-year period under the tutelage of Roisin Campbell-Palmer. And to make it clear, her name is Roisin, not Raisin, as she's constantly referred to by some of the authorities in England. So if you're going to have a conversation with her later on, guys, make sure you get that pronunciation right. And what happened was that the trial proceeded sensibly and logically according to programme on the west coast of Scotland, in an area called Knapdale, where the landscape is defined by the glaciers that pulled the land out to sea and created this series of sea lochs which are well lined with willow and a variety of other riparian tree species. Meantime, in the east, it became rapidly apparent that some of the beavers that had been brought in to be kept in enclosures hadn't stayed in the enclosures for very long. Now, for those of you from North America, you may think this is an absurd idea, the idea that we're going to bring an animal that's got a set of bolt cutters in its face and try to keep it behind a fence. For those of us in Britain at the time, it was the only option there was possible. So many people did it. And what happened was that a couple of years into the trial in Knapdale, all of a sudden, down the east coast of Scotland and near the towns or the cities of Perth and Dundee, trees started to turn upside down. And nobody could quite figure out how this had happened. It became apparent there was an awful lot of wood chip at the bottom of them, and then eventually the nature conservation authorities realised that actually there were very many beavers living in a landscape, and they had been there for very many years, long before the official trial started. This is the pattern of beaver distribution, more or less, in Britain now. Your official trial in Knapdale is over on the west coast, and Roisin's going to kick me very hard because I haven't even put that on the bloody map, have I? It's so officially small. But right the way through the rest of the landscape, and I didn't do that on purpose, the rest of the landscape, you have beavers living wild in the red circled areas, and beavers increasingly living in enclosures in the blue areas, because bear in mind that's legal, with many of the blue areas running rapidly at this point in time into red as well. Why did we have to do this? Well, I'm not going to comment on American politics. It would be wrong of me to do so. But I think this guy's probably no longer involved in the election you guys are just about to undertake, because J.D. Vance took his place. Why did it happen? It happened because at the end of it all, we had no other option. When we sit and we talk, in the other auditorium about consensus, and about actually trying to develop this gentle curve of talking that's been, so in the end, overwhelmingly gratifying, I think you'd say, Brock, in California, to see where you've come from and see where you are. In Britain, you have to remember that we live in a landscape, where 40% of the people who own phenomenal amounts of the land are the people who were granted that land by William the Conqueror 1,000 years ago. And their attitude, is deeply conservative. They have great influence over politicians, and though they're a tiny sector of society, they are able to do things in a way that nobody else can. It doesn't matter how logical your project is. It doesn't matter what the scientific base is. In the end, they will stop you. You'll follow the guidelines. You'll play the game. And at the end of it all, just as you're nearing a consummate victory, the game will all change. So we've been faced with a very different situation. We've been faced with a situation where you used to go into meetings and you used to have conversations and you used to look at the people who opposed you across the table. until one day you realized that they were deeply committed, not to discussing what you wanted to do, but to destroying every effort you were about to make. So much of this has been achieved without consensus. Those animals have appeared in watersheds where people, for the first time ever, whose willow woodlands they're living in, and who are delighted to have them, and who love them, and who represent a majority view of the population, are actually able to enjoy something tangible and real. I know I'm running out of time, but we are the first nation in Europe which shamefully has gone from beaver reintroduction approximately 10, 15 years ago to lethal control in a landscape where much suitable habitat for the creature otherwise remains within a 10-year period, because our nature conservation authorities are so broken and so weak, and our government is so unclear in purpose, that there has been no other option. We have people, of course, who love them and have stood up on their behalf very nobly and written and spoken out against this wrong. We have little grey, intermittent people who come as ministers in government and who in the next couple of days at COP26 may make a commitment to restoring the beaver, but that doesn't mean that officially we're going to be able to do it. So if you want controversy, we're a small, small country far to the east of this land that has left the civilized states of Europe to go it on our own. And when it comes to, we have plenty of controversy there. I love your graphs, I love your thinking, but there's a hard reality here, which is we could not have accomplished by legal means at all now what we have achieved today. Thank you very much indeed. I'm assuming there is no time for questions.